My name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. Today, I am reviewing The Ghosts of Marshley Park by Amanda Innes. This is a YA paranormal romance all about a young murder victim who wakes up on another person's grave, realizes she's been murdered, and decides to solve her own murder. You actually first begin by learning about the ghost whose grave she was dumped on, Julian, finding her body there and meeting her ghost. I did like how this one was a little bit different from a lot of other stories of this archetype in that Jade does not remember the events directly leading up to her murder. This is not a case of she knows exactly who did it, she just has to get the information out. This is more of a she's trying to figure it out too, which I guess makes sense. Trauma and traumatic events have memory loss, and if the trauma was bad enough to lead to death, severe memory loss, it tracks. So I was really interested in that aspect, and right off the bat, I really liked the differences in their POVs. Both Julian, our 16-year-old Victorian ghost whose grave she was dumped on, and Jade, our murder victim, have very distinctive writing styles in their paragraphs, or in their POVs, I should say. And Julian was much more formal in his. Obviously, he was born and raised and died in the Victorian era. She was much more informal because she was born, raised, and died in the modern era. And so the differences really played nicely. I could tell whose POV I was reading even if I didn't read the header at the top of every chapter. And also, they kind of usually did one every other for the most part, so it was pretty easy to follow. It was a really quick writing style in that the pages always just seemed to fly by. I would have liked a little bit more description for some things, for a little bit more ambiance, but in general, the actual writing style was pretty good. I liked the beginning of the plot. The first 2/3 of the plot did pretty well, but now we got to get into some things. So I'm going to go with the first thing I had a decent issue with, and then the second thing that I had a gigantic issue with. So first off is the plot. This is a murder mystery wherein a murder victim is trying to solve their own murder. That sounds really cool. The thing is that it kind of squanders the premise, and to a certain extent, I think part of the reason is the mechanics of the world kind of screwed the author over. I would have changed the mechanics because in this world, ghosts are tethered to their body or body parts, and they can only go so far, and whenever they fade out, because they will just randomly dissipate and reform, they always reform around their body. And obviously, once her body is discovered, they're not just gonna leave it in the graveyard, and that kind of limits things. That almost also means that she can't go move to go see where, like, the people are, the suspects are. She's very limited into only hanging around the places that dead bodies would already be. And so I would have rather that the mechanics of ghostliness allowed her to travel more. Maybe ghosts can also go haunt family members, and so she can go, like, haunt her family and see what's going on and gather information that way. Maybe she could have haunted her physical objects, so while they're in police lockup, she can go to the police station and figure out what they're gathering, like that kind of stuff. I wish there had been a lot more mechanics, because I feel like then the mystery would have been a greater focal point of this story. Because she was so limited, a lot of it was just her following people around and just happening upon people. But I did like a lot of the other mechanics of ghostliness, like they will kind of go in and out of kind of corporealness. Only certain people can ever see them, but at certain moments they can move things, and there's not really necessarily any rhyme or reason as to when that happens. They can just kind of feel, okay, I am more in the world, and oh, now I'm all floaty. And I liked that. It definitely made for some nice points. It did feel a little bit too convenient that the author could, turn it on and off whenever, oh, this scene would be more tense if they can't touch anything, but we need them to be able to touch something in this scene for plot purposes. I would have liked a little bit more rules to that. Like, you start off more corporeal, and then as the night goes on, you grow more non-corporeal, grow more floaty. But in general, I did like how much focus there was on ghost mechanics. There wasn't a lot of focus for Jade on her own death. But we'll get to that in a second, because the big problem I had with the plot was by the third act, it almost felt like the author gave up on the very concept of the mystery, because there hadn't really been a lot of suspects. Like, they had an idea, oh, you were seen leaving the party with someone vaguely fitting this description, and she vaguely remembered something, but there wasn't like, oh, okay, here are our suspects list, here's who we're sussing out. And then third act, a ton of new characters are introduced. One of them is the murderer, and they just say that they are, and then immediately tells her why they did it. And I'm like, like, why? That was the big thing. And now there was a secondary mystery to it as well, because she was purposely dumped on Julian's grave. And so the question was, why? Why, of all the places you could dump a body, would you dump it on this one specific dude's grave from the Victorian era? And it did come into play, and it, in theory, it was a good mystery. The payoff, again, was a little iffy. And the third act in general just raced through it, introduced a ton of new characters in a very short period of time, and just presented all of this new information at once. And it did that thing in storytelling where it presents the new information right before it's going to become useful, instead of, setting it up earlier and then having it pay off. To have a really satisfying setup and payoff, you gotta stretch it out. If you have it right like that, it comes across a lot more like it feels like the author had just thought of it and decided to write that down real quick, instead of not even just thinking about it from the beginning. Like, you could be within the middle of the writing process and be like, oh, what if this? But then you gotta go back and add in the lead up to that reveal. And so that was my big thing with the plot, was the pacing was decent at first, but then it felt like we just threw all that out the window. And again, I would have liked there to actually be like her investigating and having suspects, and her going and spending more time with her family, because the fact that she was so unbothered by the concept that she would literally never see her family again weirded me out. And at one point she was like, oh, I guess my family and I was never really felt attached to them. Like, I get what that's trying to do. It's trying to make it less sad that she is a ghost and let you focus on the ghost romance. But there's no way to make that sound good or believable that she's like, oh yeah, I guess she just wasn't attached to my family, and have it not be an issue. But that leads into my big problem with the book, which is I hate the romance. And I don't like saying it that harshly, but there were times I literally wanted Julian to be rid of Jade, because he can't leave his interred body. Her body's being moved around a lot, so she's a lot more mobile than him. I literally wanted her removed from him. I disliked the relationship that much. And it has part to do with the fact that Jade's character started off unlikable in a standard way. It felt like it was done with purpose. She has anger issues. She was raised wealthy. Okay, makes sense. She never grows over the course of the story. In fact, she gets worse. And in a way that I don't think the author intended, considering the fact that she still gets the happy ending at the end. What I mean by that is, so you have Julian in his very formal style. Jade mocks him for it constantly, yells at him all the time, and just blatantly ignores all of his discomfort constantly. She thinks he talks too much. His formal manner of speaking annoys her. She snaps at him constantly. She calls him by his first name, not Mr. Pendle, even when he has expressly stated that because of how he grew up, it insinuates a level of intimacy they do not have. And at one point he does snap at her and be like, do not call me by my first name. We don't know each other that well. She does it for like a hot minute and then goes right back to calling him by his first name. And in general, she never comes to find that endearing at all. And it's really aggravating. But the big thing that annoyed me was this book definitely suffered from, one, heteronormativity, and also the idea that when a girl does things like this, it's not as bad. What I mean by that is Julian, I swear he was ace. I thought he was ace for so much of the story, because he talked about how he had never had any interest in anything physical, basically ever. And at one point, without warning, without consent, Jade just launches herself at him when they're corporeal and kisses him. He doesn't like it, and she gets mad. How dare he not like me? That's that's toxic. That's unhealthy. If the genders had been reversed and Amanda did that to a woman, no one would even think of making that the romance of the story, unless of course, you're writing one of those really dark romances, but I don't read those for a reason. And that kind of thing the entire time. At one point, a new female character is introduced, a human-sighted person that can see the ghosts. And just the very fact that there is a possible romantic rival for a boy she's not in a relationship with, she turns horrid and complaining about it constantly. Reminder, he didn't like kissing her. He's not interested at this point. He has nothing to do with this other sighted person. It's literally just a person that can see ghosts. So of course they're going to interact, and she's furious. And I'm like, oh my lord, you're a yandere at this point. Like, that's not normal teenage girl behavior. And they kind of like, oh, it's just her anger issues. No, that's abusive. That's the, like, I have laid claim to this person and therefore I'm pissed. And I won't spoil anything for the ending, but she basically, because of this pettiness, is fully willing to throw under characters at the mercy of the antagonist because of this pettiness. She never grows from it. She never gets any consequences. And this is a romance. They still end up together at the end. I hated it. I did not want them to end up together. And there is another couple, side characters, that also end up together after a horribly toxic beginning to their relationship. And that's why I say this book is very heteronormative, because if you don't look at it through the boy plus girl must end up together at the end of the story lens, the relationships make no sense. The romances only make sense if you follow if there is a boy protagonist and a girl protagonist, they must end up together at the end. And that was my big frustration with this, because so much of the rest of it had really cool concepts, had really cool ideas, had cool writing styles. But when the crux of the story is this romance that is inherently flawed, unhealthy, and I want Julian to get out of, I can't enjoy the primary plot of the story. And that was really frustrating to me. So at the end, I actually gave this book 3 stars just because I was genuinely enjoying it at the beginning, when I still thought Jade was going to get some positive character growth. Like, learning to like the way this cute boy speaks, or finally learning to chill out and that she's not the center of the universe. But there's never that growth, and she still gets the romance anyway. And it's very upsetting. There are also some minor things that I would have liked drawn out more in the plot. A lot of things, again, that were kind of just dumped in the third act out of nowhere that could have used a lot more time. Definitely a lot more of Jade coming to grips with the fact that she was dead. There wasn't a lot of that. Again, I think the book was trying really hard to not have you think about the fact that this 16-year-old girl and this 16-year-old boy back in the 19th century were cut down in the prime of their life. Although at one point, all of the mentions of Julian being an abomination and people that knew him alive as other ghosts, like referring to him as an abomination or something, I swear I thought he was going to turn out to be gay. And I was upset when that didn't happen. Like, oh, he's definitely wasn't interested in that kiss, was never interested in women his own time period. This dude that knew him when he was alive called him an abomination. Queer rap? No. So that probably definitely contributed to my disappointment at the end. So in general, yes, 3 stars. If you just want the cool, spooky ghost vibes, it's a quick read. However, be aware of things like mentions of suicide and, of course, toxic relationships. Editing Margaret, I did not remember until after I had filmed this that the author had actually noted to me in the review request that she had intended to make this a friendship story. I'm not seeing that at all, because there is kissing and there's a lot of focus on physical attraction. And even if it is a friendship story, it's a very toxic friendship. So it could still have used a lot of development. Now, if you are an indie author and you would like a review, please let me know. I will have my info down in the description below. please be sure to read through the review policy. It answers a lot of questions and saves us a lot of time. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.